Well, here we go. So, as suggested by Cinesemiotics, we're going to read about the study of name, a journal of study of names, and we're going to be reading about Ursula Le Guin, magic names Onomastics in the Fantasies of Ursula Le Guin. Cool. And it's only 9 pages, so unlike the last one, it might not take 2 hours to get through this. That was fun, though. Okay. So, onward. And as always, feel free to ask questions and, if I say anything that doesn't make sense, let me know. Cinesemiotic says, it's amazing what is baked into the names that have been carefully selected by authors, often to infuse philosophy into the narrative, and thus it is philosophy as art. Oh, absolutely. And this is not a new point. Like what's in a name? It's a big deal, and people get sometimes actually they read way too much into a name, and other times they don't. But it's a big deal. So we'll find out. All right, continuing. Names in literature have long been studied. Literary onomastics is, indeed, one of the major branches of name study. Size matters, really, Cinesemiotics. It's very interesting that you'd say that. If any proof of that fact is needed, one need only look at the program of the 1981 annual meeting of the American Name Society, in which 2/5 of the papers were devoted to names in literature, or to the annual conference on literary onomastics and literary onomastics studies arranged by Grace Alvarez Altman, or to the study of names in literature, a bibliography by Elizabeth M. Ryak. Most literary onomastic studies have been devoted to characteronyms. Cinesemiotic says, to me it's interesting, though, and worth remembering that philosophy was not always distinct from literature itself. Yeah, there's always overlap, and the idea that it was so different back in the day, of course, there was not the hard distinctions we like making nowadays. Oh, this is science, this is philosophy, but yeah, I mean, those distinctions are useful, but to a point. Characternym. So the term characternym seems not to be entered into any general dictionary so far, although it has been current among students of names for some time. It was apparently invented by Thomas Eliot Berry, who proposed the term in a note in word study in 1949. Kelsey Harder helped to popularize it with his study of Faulkner's novels. It has since been much used. 6 times in the Ryak bibliography have characternym in their titles, and doubtless a good many others do in their texts. Berry defined the term simply as a trait name, that is, a name somehow appropriate to a character. My impression is that it is usually pronounced with first syllable stress, although I heard it given stress on the second syllable in a paper read at the American Dialect Society's annual meeting in 1973. It is sometimes spelt characternym and has such synonyms as label name, attributive name, and characterizing name. Yeah, so this is the sort of thing, and this actually comes up in a philosophy of language too. What's in a name? If you have somebody's name is called Armstrong, does that mean they have strong arms, or does that have nothing to do with them? But of course, some people, what's in a name? They go back to The Simpsons, of course. Homer Simpson renamed himself Max Power, and all of a sudden, everybody wanted to get to know him because his name was Max Power. So, and this is the sort of thing that politicians and actors and such, they try to maximize what they can do with their names and stuff like that. But I mean, it's more in literature. It can be a bit more sophisticated than just Max Power. Comedy. Paper size. I see. Although there have been many studies of particular characternyms in various works of literature, the characternym itself has not received much attention. That is, the theory of literary naming has been relatively neglected. There have been studies by Gurist Tarnawecki, Nicolaisen, and Rudnicki, among others. Yet how an author invents appropriate names is worth more attention than it has received. Cinesemiotic says, I want to mention something important to the topic, though. I took a medicine in the past called Topamax. One of its common side effects is that the patient often can't recall proper nouns. Wow, that's seems like a very significant side effect. All other nouns aren't affected, but proper nouns don't retrieve quickly or reliably. It's weird. So I guess I'm saying there's evidence that we neurologically handle names different than all other words. Yeah, and the philosophy of proper names is very sophisticated, like the philosophy of language. So it gets reflected in the philosophy too. There seems to be something very, very different and special about proper names as opposed to just objects that aren't unique name, like uniquely like, so this is a cup over here. This isn't a proper name, but my name is Noger. There's only one of me, and so somehow that sort of specificity makes a very big difference. And how you connect the name to something in the world is a perennial problem in the philosophy of language. So no one really gets how words connect up with the world. So that's why this is an interesting topic in terms of philosophy of language and literature. I actually haven't seen this sort of thing. I've seen a lot of stuff on the philosophy of language on proper names, but I have not seen it from the literary side, this is sort of interesting. It's also funny that you struggle with pronouncing the names of people in the names of this paper. Oh, cinesemiotics. Let me tell you something. I used to, like everybody else, I listened to podcasts. Years ago, I was listening to one podcast, and the guy would butcher every single name. And it was kind of like a running joke, but I got a little annoyed. I'm like, why are you butchering even easy names? Oh, I don't care how it's pronounced. Nogreo, Noger, whatever. I don't actually care how you pronounce my name. I get a lot of Nogs and Nogrios and whatever. It's all fine by me. I go by Noger Zero sometimes, but Nogrio is fine. Anyone who's, however, as long as you're not making fun of me, I don't care what you're saying. I wanted to kill this guy because he always was butchering names. You don't understand until you're broadcasting a lot. It screws with you. This is just one of the things in broadcasting. Maybe some people are good at it. It is incredibly difficult to like parse proper names in real time. Just like you're trying to figure out, like I'm not a I'm not a historian of language. I can't like pick out last names and know what the pronunciation is of them. And like I wanted to kill the dude, but I completely understand it now. Like it is so hard to get names in real time correct. Like I can read English just fine, but like the names, nah. Like because I'm going through languages, I'm trying to figure out where the intonations should be. I can barely. I know English and bad English, and everything else is sort of a mystery to me. Anywho, but like I understand reading names is tough now. Yeah, continuing. Yet how an author invents appropriate names is worth more attention than it has received. The ways of name making are manifold. There are too many possibilities to cover easily, so here the focus is on just two extreme kinds of character names, extreme in the terms of how the name is suitable to the character. The two kinds of name are illustrated from two novels by Ursula K. Le Guin, The Lathe of Heaven and A Wizard of Earthsea. Ursula K. Le Guin is one of the most accomplished contemporary writers of both fantasy and science fiction, two literary genres that are alike in being non-mainstream fiction but are in some ways quite distinct from each other. Science fiction is usually set in high-tech futuristic version of the world we know, but modified in some significant way. Science fiction is a literary Gedanken experiment in which the author asks what the world would be like if it were different in a certain specific but more or less probable ways from the ordinary world of tea and toast. Fantasy, on the other hand, usually has low-tech medieval setting that is clearly no simple variation on the Earth we know. It is a secondary creation, to use J.R.R. Tolkien's useful term, which is inhabited by legendary creatures like dragons and in which magic works about as well as computer programming does among us. The use of names in science fiction has been investigated, for example, by Robert Planck and John R. Kruger. Names in fantasy writing has been less studied, although J.R.R. Tolkien's names have received attention, for example, by Ruth S. Noel and John Tinkler. Le Guin's novels have a strong anthropological flavor about them, a fact that is hardly surprising since she is the daughter of Alfred and Theodora Kroeber, who were eminent in anthropology and linguistics. Le Guin's science fiction is set in worlds whose most interesting differences from ours are not their technology, but the way their human societies have adapted to the environment. For example, in The Left Hand of Darkness, a race of androgynous humanity lives on a planet that is in the middle of an ice age, and the novel is concerned chiefly with how such differences of sex and climate affect behavior. Le Guin's best fantasy is placed in the world of Earthsea, where there are no continents but many small islands set in the midst of a limitless ocean. On these islands, magicians are as common as mackerels are in the sea. How would people act in a world of sea and spells and an occasional dragon? That is the theme of Earthsea Tales. As worlds and lives differ, so do names. And to illustrate the point of this essay, the naming techniques of Le Guin has used in her science fiction show some significant differences from those in her fantasy. The only earlier study of Le Guin's naming practices I know is Walter E. Mayer's careful examination of the canonical forms of names in one of her science fiction works. Alright, so I mean, we can just think about how are names given nowadays anyway. There's a few different ways people, at least I know, have got names. They've got names like Potter, which usually meant that someone way back in their family made pots, or like Hatter, or like, Smith. In the U.S., Smith is the most common name. Smith means to make something, like you're a metalsmith or a leathersmith. Like they were craftspeople. That's what they did. In other countries I know, they have like names like of the hill or something. Like it was a location based name, like you are John who lives on the hill, and like so the who lives on the hill got to be part of your name. And then you also have like son of this important person or related to that person. So you've got lineage, you've got location, and you've got practice. Those are usually the sorts of things that you're expecting for last names in at least, some Western societies. I forget how these things go in some other places, but around here, the people, you have locations, you have craft, and you have lineage. So let's see if there's like so much different from other stuff. Henry the Insignificant. People also got made fun of in their names too. So like that also happened. You got like deemed something. You can remember Robin Hood Men in Tights. And so, we're going to name all the bathrooms after you. We're going to call all bathrooms from here forth will be known as John's. So, and of course, the joke with the witch was her last name was Latrine. And then she said they changed it to Latrine. And the guy goes, oh, they changed it to Latrine from what? And he goes, shithouse. And he goes, oh, it's a good change. It's a very good change. So, all right. But yeah, I take it in the science fiction world, the technology is different, and therefore the sort of naming convention of what it is to be a craftsperson will be different. In the fantasy world, again, you've got magic, which is also a different kind of technology. Again, you're going to have magical things set, so like locations and the magic are going to matter. In either of these, I don't think you're going to get the lineage ones unless someone was like a very important magician or technomancer that, they'd be worth referring back to. But that's my guess at the moment. I don't know these things yet. Okay, continuing. The Lathe of Heaven is a good example of one kind of naming technique. It is a science fiction novel set in the year 2002. Oh my god, so far in the future. In Seattle, Washington. The two principal characters are George Orr and William Haber. George is a dreamer, a passive sort of chap who discovers that from time to time he has a powerful dream, an effective dream he calls it, that changes reality. When George wakes up, whatever he has dreamt, whatever he has dreamed, then exists in reality and has, as far as everyone other than George himself knows, always existed. Nobody else is aware that the nature of reality shifts with George's dreams. Nobody, that is, except Haber. Haber is a second-rate psychologist to whom George has been mandatorily referred for violating the limits on drug use, in an effort to stop himself from dreaming. Haber introduces hypnotic sleep in George, and being present when one of the effective dreams occurs, realizes what those dreams do to the world. Haber then sets out through hypnotic suggestion to control George's dreams and thus to remold the world nearer to his own desires. Unfortunately, dreams are controlled by the subconscious, which takes suggestions but twists their interpretations, so things often turn out the other than Haber intends. Oh, I didn't know this story. It's a massive spoiler. It's sort of like a monkey's fist tale, where you get to make wishes, but you get your wishes, but it all turns out like you get it for the wrong reasons. Like you want to win $1 million, but like your whole family is killed, and therefore like the government gives you like some sort of insurance. But yeah, so that's interesting. That's a lot of fun. I should have read the story. Oh well. The names of these two characters mirror their personalities closely and transparently. George Orr is uncertain, diffident, a born victim because he is trusting and essentially good nature. So Orr, I guess they're focusing on the or, like either or, and therefore like you're in between things. So you're diffident, born victim because like you can't decide, and you're good natured. You just sort of accept one or the other. Under his plodding and simple exterior, he has, however, a depth of strength and integrity and courage. He is a perfectly balanced and adaptable individual who accepts whatever comes to him because he is centered and whole. Or well, possibly. I mean, I'm trying to think where the references to Orwell. Like, I mean, I don't think Orwell was a born victim. That doesn't sound like Orwell. And I don't know if Orwell was trusting and good-natured, but or like the just like either or, like and or sort of or is interesting because it seems like balanced. You could have one or the other. Adaptable, you could take either side. So I think that's what the author is going for here. So it's like this sort of stuff, balanced and adaptable. I actually don't know what Orwell's personality was like, but I mean, he didn't seem like the shrinking and born victim. Like, he didn't seem like a born victim, at least from his writing. Yeah, 1984 is sci-fi about the future, but yeah, but again, why would the George Orr be named after George Orwell? Like, is there anything about Orwell just, and especially what year was and we'd have to check the years. When was 1984 written versus when was this story written? Given that this was even yeah, I'd have to look. I mean, could look real quick. So this is called what in the 50s. So yeah, but when did Le Guin write her book, and when did he write his? So so you think she's honoring Orwell? It's possible. But that's not what the author is saying here, it looks like. I mean, because under his plodding and simple exterior, was Orwell plodding and simple? I mean, maybe the first name is. I mean, I'd give it, like, the fact that it is, but, like, that doesn't seem like what the author is saying here at all. Because was Orwell uncertain, diffident, anything like that? Maybe the first name. I'll give you that. This could be the George part is, but the or doesn't seem to be what the author is saying here at all. Well, that's fair. That it's unavoidable that they want to mention George Orwell. So I'll grant you that on the first part, but that doesn't seem to be what the author is saying here. Yeah, I mean, sure. It's like you always see, what's his name? You know, Philip K. Dick and stuff. All sorts of references to him in all, like, modern sci-fi. Yeah, well, we'll see. Alright, so George Orr, he is a perfectly balanced and adaptable individual who accepts whatever comes to him because he is centered and whole. William Haber, by contrast, is assertive, exploitive, and egocentric. He has a messiah complex, being a do-gooder who is so intent on improving the world according to his own vision of what is desirable that he is unable to recognize the disaster he is creating. So what does Haber have to mean about, like, making a disaster? As George is passive and yin-like, Haber is active and yang-like. George is a poetic dreamer who changes the world without trying or wanting to. Haber is a social scientist, a schemer who plots to improve the world, and, as Mencken observed, when A annoys or injures B on the pretense of improving B, A is a scoundrel. Yeah. I don't know where that name is, though. Why this Haber mirrors their personalities. Haber means exist or happens. Okay. Sure. So, like, he's concerned with existence then. What it is to be in the world. Huh. Alright, I didn't know that. Thank you. Yeah, see, okay. Waiting on... Alright, so we're going back to George. George from the Greek is etymologically farmer, one connected with Gaia or Mother Earth. So George is earthy in his simplicity, and he causes things to grow. New worlds raised into the light of reality from the dark subterranean loam of his subconscious dreams. His given name is etymologically appropriate, involving a pun that is integral with the history of the world. It is organically suited to him. It also suggests a bear. Interesting. Haber suggests a bear. Okay. I mean, yeah, so it's like he's going to be breaking things, perhaps, like a bear might. George's last name, or, is perhaps a double pun. First and most certain, it puns on the conjunction or, though that's what I was picking up. Because he appears indecisive, one character refers to him as Mr. Either Or. Being perfectly balanced between extremes, he measures in the middle on all psychological tests, a fact that Haber comments on. If you put all your scores onto the same graph, you sit smack in the middle at 50. Dominance, for example, I think you are 48.8 on that. Neither dominant nor submissive. Independence, dependence, same thing. Both neither, either, or. The other possible pun on George's last name is Or, O-R-E. His mind is the raw stuff out of which new realities are fashioned. He could be born into any world. He had no character. He was a lump of clay, a block of uncarved wood, or we might say, a piece of ore. Another significance of George's name is suggested by the fact that the United States of the novel underwent a revolution in which the Constitution was rewritten, setting up a police state. The year of that event was 1984, thus George Orr is an unwell George Orwell. Okay, so that's funny, and you were right about this, so I like the fact that it is an unwell George Orwell. So, yeah, that's what I mean. It's not George Orwell, but you are right about the George Orwell reference, and especially when they went and put up a police state in 1984. Bop. Haber's name are appropriate in the same way, though less striking in their associations. His given name William suggests his willfulness. In a moment of ecstatic anticipation, Haber exults. We are on the brink of discovering and controlling for the good of all mankind a whole new force, an entire new field of anti-entropic energy, of the life force, of the will to act, to do, to change. William is acrostically I am will, and the assertion of his self-will is Haber's dominant characteristic. His last name suggests Latin habere or German haben, both with the sense have, possess, hold. In his name, William Haber thus says, I am the will to have, to control, to dominate. It is easy to see why Le Guin chose the names of the two principal characters in the story. They are traditional, characterizing names with transparent motivations. Their associations are public. They involve puns that are etymologically or that anyone can recognize, and a literary allusion to a well-known novel. The names fairly invite the reader to interpret them. Yeah, so this does seem like, I'm not good at this, but it does seem like someone who is better at this would pick up on it very quickly. I usually just read this stuff and I'm like analyzing like philosophy. I'm not thinking about, oh, literary connections, how nice. A Wizard of Earthsea is a different sort of novel in several respects, including the sort of name its characters have. Its Neverland setting is an archipelago in the midst of the great ocean. As in all high fantasy, magic plays a role. There is magic of all kinds, ranging from the simple sleight of hand to true magic, which is the control of reality by the use of names. Every person has first a child name given by one's mother. Then one has a use name, a kind of nickname alluding to appearance or behavior, which name may be different in different localities as one's appearance or behavior changes from time to time or from place to place. And finally, one has a true name, which is a secret told only to one's closest and most trusted friends. To know the true name of any person or of anything is to have power over that person or thing. Yeah, this is a very recurring theme, this one, where if you know something's true name, you like sort of have its essence to like control or to, manipulate. So, the protagonist of the novel begins life with a child named Dooney. He has as a use name Sparrowhawk because he has learned to call that bird from the sky and to control it. His true name, however, is Ged. It was given, or perhaps more accurately revealed to him by the wizard Ogion when the boy came of age. The high wizards of the island of Roke, where there is a kind of advanced institute for magic and naming, are the only ones who know the true names of all things. The novel is a Bildungsroman. Le Guin herself has said that its theme is coming of age, a process of foreshadowing by the change of name that the protagonist undergoes in his passage through the rites of manhood. The story is about the integration of the self, in Jungian terms, as Ged, in an act of youthful bravado, raises a shadowy specter that he cannot control, but that he must eventually meet and become reconciled with. Ged gains power over the shadow and exercises it only by discovering its true name at the climax of the novel. The names of other characters in the story are Nemero, the Archmage Roke, Vetch, Ged's best friend, and Seret, an anima figure with whom Ged must contend. These names are typical of those in the trilogy of Earthsea books and are striking in contrast with the names Le Guin gave her characters in The Lathe of Heaven. Whatever associations these names have, they are not public but private and unavailable to the general reader. You know, it's interesting that, like, he says it's not public but private, because the amount of effort that goes into these names, of course, makes a difference. And I watched a little bit of Game of Thrones. I didn't actually see. No, I read the first book. And I saw like one episode. But I know that George R.R. Martin, and on that show, he employed like linguists, and so they were going deep into like the history of linguistics to get new names, new words, and new sounds, so that like their stuff could sound different and be different. But there was a ton of history built into this. So in one of these things, it's like you can figure it out if you know enough stuff. So it's not that it's not public, but it's a little bit more involved. I mean, why would a writer just make up like some random like word salad for a name? They wouldn't do that. And someone smart as Le Guin probably wouldn't either. Le Guin herself has commented on how she arrived at the names in this novel. She said, I did not deliberately invent Earthsea. I did not think, hey, wow, islands are archetypes and archipelagos are super archetypes, and let's build an archipelago. I am not an engineer, but an explorer. I discovered Earthsea. True fact, Jeremy Bentham was all about etymology. Cool. I wouldn't be surprised. Probably thought there was something like you could learn. You know, these are old ideas about like names having like some deeper meaning. And so the idea that, yeah, like you think there's like you're gonna learn a ton about the world by reading into like the history of words. You will learn a lot about the world if you look at the history of words, but how much philosophical understanding will you get? Well, I mean, however much is built into the grammar and like the words. But again, in some sense, that's not all of it. You're gonna learn something, but what exactly are you gonna get out of it? Because like as Wittgenstein would say, I mean, use is important. Like, you have to know how it's used. Just knowing what the dictionary says is, in some sense, one way of looking at the words and its meaning, but you have to see actually what's going on out in the real world as opposed to just in the dictionary. So, this is where I think philosophy language can go a little wrong, is when people focus too much on just the language on its own and not on what people are doing in, like, not in context doesn't come into it. Like, you don't know what people are actually up to when they're using it. And this is like my Wittgensteinian bent. It's like the language game is what gives the words meaning, not the definitions, not the history, but how's the use actually going into this? What's the form of life that would employ words like this? So, okay. More specifically, she said, 3 small islands are named for my children, their baby names. One gets a little jovial and irresponsible, given the freedom to create a world out of nothing at all. Power corrupts. None of the other names means anything that I know of, though their sound is more or less meaningful to me. Yeah, so it happened to be personal history with Le Guin. That's interesting. So she named it it isn't public, but it is in some sense. It's public to like her family, but not like public to the general public. So it just happens to be it's a historical thing for her, not a world historical, just Le Guin historical. The last sentence is a significant observation. There is no reason to doubt Le Guin when she tells us that for her, the only meaning of most of the magical names of her fantasy novel is a product of their sound. Such meaning is not cognitive sense at all, but incantational, mantric meaning. It has more in common with the sound of symbolism or the phonos theme than with semantic features. Le Guin goes on, People often ask how I think of names in fantasies, and again I have to answer them that I find them, that I hear them. This is an important subject in this context. From that first story on, naming has been the essence of the art magic as practiced in Earthsea. For me, as for the wizards, to know the name of an island or character is to know the island or the person. Usually the name comes of itself, but sometimes one must be very careful, as I was with the protagonist whose true name is Ged. I worked in collaboration with a wizard named Guin for a long time, trying to listen for his name and making certain it really was his name. This all sounds very mystical, and indeed there are aspects of it I do not understand, but it is a pragmatic business too, since if the name had been wrong, the character would have been wrong, misbegotten, misunderstood. It's one of those things that, like, writers have to sort of inhabit their characters, and so it looks like what Le Guin's saying here is she had to inhabit someone who had a life with this name in that place, and all the aspects had to fit together, like the name and the powers and the geography all had to like come together to work. And that is how she put her character together in this area. But in some sense, she's saying it is like it's not understood because she had to do it in a way that sounded right. So it wasn't something that was a deliberate, like a engineering project. It was an engineering project of getting herself into that mindset and like working with the character with all of these characteristics, not engineering a character to have those characteristics. Continuing. A man who read the manuscript for Parnassus thought Ged was meant to suggest God. That shook me badly. I considered changing the name in case there were other such ingenious minds waiting to pounce, but I couldn't do so. The fellow's name was Ged, no two ways about it. I said that to know the true name is to know the thing, for me, and for the wizards. This implies a good deal about the meaning of the trilogy and about me. The trilogy is, in one respect, about the artist as magician, the trickster, Prospero. Wizardry is artistry. The trilogy is then, in this sense, about art, the creative experience, the creative process. There is always this circularity in fantasy. The snake devours its own tail. Dreams must explain themselves. After such comments, it would be worse than presumptuous to explain the names in A Wizard of Earthsea. Names like dreams must explain themselves, and in fact there is no other explanation for such magic names, in the sense that we can have explanation the names in, for example, the Lathe of Heaven. Ged is not so called because he is to remind us of God or of anyone or anything else. Ged is Ged. That's what he's called. Yet the name is not arbitrary. It is exactly right, and he could not be called anything else. As Le Guin has said, his name is Ged, and no two ways about it. Names in fantasy are private to the writer and to the reader. Their meaning depends on their sound. And so, at some non-discursive level of knowing, the reader of A Wizard of Earthsea know that Ged is the true name of the character. It fits. All right, so this is interesting. There's a concept of fitting. And what does that mean? Fitting you can actually get in, again, late Wittgenstein in language games. You can see you can say a screw fits into a bolt or something, like a nut and a bolt, that sort of thing. Those things fit, but like you can have ones that don't fit. But then does a screw fit into like this room? Well, it can be contained in the room, but it doesn't fit. Like a screw does not fit into like a nut and bolt don't fit together. Like the bolt fits in this room. Doesn't have the same thing. And so the concept of fitting, in some sense, the name Ged, that person has to, in some sense, inhabit that reality the same way a nut and bolt can like be screwed together. So this is the thing. It's private to the writer and the reader, but people who understand the story have to understand the whole world to properly understand it, and therefore kind of, get things to fit. Samyak says, if you're interested, a scientific paper about the neurology aspects of proper nouns and topomax. Oh, that's the one that screws with proper names. Interesting. Huh. Yeah, I mean, I don't normally read science here, but it sounds fascinating. Because why would a certain chemical mess up one aspect of word recall? So yeah, but this one, I'm going for a holism claim right here. So it's not just the sound. I kind of disagree with what the author is saying here about it being a sound. It's that they're all aspects of the character, including the sound of the name. So it's a holistic thing, is that it has to fit into the world. And someone who properly understands the story starts to understand that even the sound matters to the story. The sound of the name matters to the story. Okay. Continuing. There is an anecdote in Zen Buddhism that is relevant here. Zen is a form of Buddhism especially concerned with a direct and immediate experience of reality. Zen Buddhism, like Le Guin's naming of her fantasy characters, is a pragmatic business. Its ideal is to see into the heart of things, into the essential nature of human experience. The anecdote is this. Before I studied Zen, mountains were mountains and rivers were rivers. While I was studying Zen, mountains came to mean far more than just mountains and rivers far more than just rivers. When I had completed my study of Zen, mountains were mountains, and rivers were rivers. To read literature without paying attention to the significance of the characters' names is to approach the literature in a pre-Zen state. Jor is Jor, and Ged is Ged. To see the significance in some character names, for example, those in the Lathe of Heaven, is to approach them in a mid-Zen state. Jor means far more than just Jor, but to grasp the significance of other character names, for example the magical names in Earthsea, is to understand those names in a full Zen state. Ged is Ged. Okay, so there's a lot that's like trying to be gone on with here, especially given the Buddhist anecdote. You have to realize sometimes there, even though it looks like you're repeating yourself in this sort of statement where Ged is Ged, if you say something like where am I? War is war. Like if you say something like war is war, if you think about that, sometimes what people are saying like war is hell. And so the first war means one thing and the second war means more like hell. It's like war is hell. Well, somebody says war is war or hell is hell. You're using different sense of the word. Like this specific war is a kind of terrible thing, which is the general associated with the general concept of war. And the same thing if you say hell is hell, like this hell is kind of this bigger thing that's going on here. So what's kind of, I think, happening here is you can, at first, what's happening is mountains are mountains and they're just that. But then when you're studying it, then you're realizing that they come to mean far more. And then when you finally realize it, then you start to realize that all the grand concepts that you now understand, well, that just is how it is. And then you just say it is how it is at the end. You sort of, the initial state, the war is war, you no longer have to say it to have meaning to you because the first war already has all the meaning built into it. So that's kind of what's happening, I think, with this magical discussion here, is that you've got a whole world, and the only way you understand the whole world is to, like, you understand that this Ged here is the whole world of Earthsea, and that's what it means to say Ged is Ged. But Ged is really all of Earthsea. So, like, this one is this stuff right there. So, continuing. Names like Jor that invite a mid-Zen approach give the onomatologist a lot to talk about, and so they have been very popular with students of literary onomastics. Names like Ged that require a full Zen approach don't leave much room for discussion, so they have been overlooked. But I suspect that a good many writers are like Ursula Le Guin when she writes her fantasies. The names they give characters are long thought on, carefully considered, exactly right, but are not susceptible to clever analysis. They are magical names and can be appreciated only with the sense of the magical, the fitness of the name to the thing. Yeah, so this is where we're going. The fitness of the name to the thing, it's a holism. It has to completely fit in the entire world. And that's what's the sense of the magical. How do you go from the individual to the whole? One of these old problems of philosophy and literature, for that matter. The two types of character nym exemplified in these books by Ursula K. Le Guin are extremes in what is surely a continuum of literary names, and in between point in that continuum is the place name in her short story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, whose relevance was kindly brought to my attention by C.A. Hilgartner. The story is about the city of Omelas, where everyone is perfectly utopianly happy. Everyone, that is, except one wretched child who is kept in solitary confinement in pain, filth, and torment. The well-being of the joyous citizens of Omelas depends on the continual misery of that one lost soul. Most of the citizens accept the fact that their happiness unfortunately depends on the suffering of another, but a few, when they learn the basis for their town's prosperity, renounce the comfort brought at such expense, even though it is the expense of a single scapegoat, and they go into the hardship and danger of voluntary exile. They are the ones who walk away from Omelas. In an introduction to the story, Le Guin says that the idea for it came to her from a passage in William James, although it also appears in Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov, a fact she had forgotten when she wrote the story. Of course, I didn't read James and sit down and say, now I'll write a story about that lost soul. It seldom works that simply. I sat down and I started a story just because I felt like it, with nothing but the word Omelas in mind. It came from a road sign, Salem, Oregon, backwards. Don't you read road signs backwards? Pots, wolves, Alright, so, what was that? Children. So, Nerdhillick. Nerdlick. Oskixnarf Nas. So that's San Francisco. Salem equals Shlomo equals Psalm equals peace. Melas. Homelas. Hum elas. Where do you get your ideas from, Miss Le Guin? From forgetting Dostoevsky and reading road signs backwards, naturally. Where else? Omelas is a magic name of sort of. It would take a rare reader to make the association that Le Guin has shown the name has for her. Salem means peace, though in Salem, Massachusetts, they burnt women for witchcraft. It is a cognate with Arabic salam, a greeting, though in the story the brave characters bid farewell to their Omelas, which is Salem O. Reversed, a town whose peace is based on the oppression of one person, and which therefore is rejected by those with conscience. Melas is Greek for black, the dark shade hidden beneath the brightness of Omelas. Omelas is homophonous with hom elas, man alas. It takes a considerable ingenuity, perhaps even for Le Guin, to arrive at such interpretations of the name. It is likely that she began with the sound and only later realized its semantic potential. It is thus a partly magic and partly transparent name, a kind of opaque character nym. These two sorts of literary names, the magical and the transparent, are not discrete categories, but directions on a continuous scale. Omelas is somewhere in the middle, yet the distinction between the two extreme types of character nym should be clear. It is sometimes said that we can recognize three stages of scholarship. In the first, we gather information. In the second, we classify and categorize the data gathered, looking for patterns in it. In the third, we seek for general rules and causes, explanations of the patterns that we can use as a basis for predicting future data. Onomastics has generally been in the first of those stages. A useful, necessary stage it is. Serious work in the third stage is a long way off, if indeed it is even possible for a discipline like Onomastics, which is clearly, I can't read German, Geistwissenschaftlich, not Naturwissenschaftlich. However, the second stage is possible for Onomastics right now, and as we gather our data, we should attempt to find patterns in it. The present essay is meant as a very small step in that direction. It tries to respond in a modest way to the challenge in W.F.H. Nicolasen's keynote address at the 9th Literary Onomastic Studies Conference, a challenge that all students of names and literature should do their best to meet. Okay, this is a fun paper. I mean, we got to talk about, some sci-fi, some fantasy, and where do we get names. And we also got to talk about parts and wholes, which is a nice philosophical topic, and philosophy of language and proper names, which are also nice philosophy of language topics. So this was much more, I guess unsurprisingly, I didn't know what onomastics meant, but we're into philosophy of language and linguistics at this point. And how do we actually give meaning? It's a question of meaning here. Now, is the meaning something that has to do with analysis, or does the meaning have to do with holism? And that's what we've got. That's basically the tension the author is pointing out here. Is it a question of breaking things down compositionally, where different thing like the words mean different things, it has different histories, etymologies, whatever, or is it like Ged, which really should be entirely resisted to do any of that sort of compositional analysis on, and instead find out how the understanding of that word, actually that name, means something in that place in Earthsea. So like Ged only has its proper understanding with reference to that entire universe, whereas the other names have there's an understanding to them that exists as a compositional for in terms of, you know, historical meaning, or you know, with reference to George Orwell, as Cinesemiotics pointed out, and so did the author, or whatever else, or just the plain linguistic name, or like just the dumb sort of that's exactly what it says on the page. So yeah, so this is interesting. I mean, we have no good reference. I mean, in philosophy of language, we have what's it called? Semantic magnetism, where words are somehow like magnetically drawn to their meanings, to their subjects. Like it's some sort of natural process where we, you know, we have a name of a thing like literary. And why does literary mean things? Well, we are magnetically drawn to put that word with the, you know, literature, like books. And that does not really, if you want a naturalistic explanation, it's like, well, how does that possibly even work? I don't know. But like that's one theory of how words have their meaning. And of course then you can reference, you know, like, well, it's a convention. This is what you know, we learn to do because we have like break it down like historically. Okay, that's another one. But like, you know, is there a causal structure that leads back to something? You've got like a causal theory that goes back to like the first naming thing, which then would be completely magical, because like, you know, say I call this thing a cup, and then from there on out everyone else calls it cup, and you know, all the notions of being a cup are draw back to this initial baptism of it being a cup. I think this is a Kripke somewhere. This is due to him. Yeah. So then, like, you've got a causal structure. Semiotics ask, what is philosophy of mind versus proper nouns, and what we've discussed here. Philosophy of mind. Okay, yeah. So this is again, how does the mind put meaning to things? And this is what a lot of the questions are in philosophy of language. Well, this is where it overlaps. How does the mind actually connect up the words and the world? And that's what I mean. These theories are that the mind has the ability to like connect the words and the world in some way, by experiencing sort of like the semantic magnetism, where the word somehow is drawn to the objects. And that's the magical theory here, where the words sort of fit into the world in a way we do not understand, but that is how we sort of are drawn to things. Then there's the other one where it's the causal structure. I don't know all the linguistic theories here, but I can talk about a little bit of the philosophy of language ones. And then you've got the causal structure, where we're always referencing the causal history. And that's kind of what our mind does. It's looking for causal structures. And looking for causal structures, we can say, okay, well, what do I call it? Well, I call it this, like I call a cup because, yeah, well, this is, of course, is related to semiotics and like theories of science and how they relate. But these are causal structures. Is the philosophy of language theory is a causal structure, not a theory of science. But like them we're always referencing back, because that's a convention, goes back to the initial baptism of calling a cup for the first time. Yeah, I mean, and how that first time happened, well, it's like some sort of arbitrary baptism, like that's just what we call it, and we don't know how it happened or why it happened, but that's what did happen. Some sort of act of creativity. But that's also mysterious in itself. But like these are how the this is like what the mind, this is the work of the mind, is to like connect the meaning in the world. Semiology, actually. Okay. So yeah, I mean, but this is interesting because it exists within the fictional or the fantasy world in some sense. The way Le Guin was doing it was to expand on sort of this the structure of a whole world is why a name is there. That's the causal structure, but it would go to the entire structure of that universe is the source of the name Ged. So the whole thing goes to Earthsea, but that's the causal structure of the entire universe of Earthsea. And then the or one, of course, is all the convention. So you got the two major theories, or at least the two ones I can think of at the moment, of meaning in language. How we get meaning in language right here. So the compositional analysis of all the different sort of possible histories here, and then we have the causal analysis that goes to the entire holistic world. Okay, so I don't know if I have anything else to say. I mean, there's just the tension in getting meanings to names, and it's an old problem. So, I mean, this is a nice paper too, and it's a fun thing. Like, if you're gonna do like a philosophy of language course, like this is a better essay than any of the ones you're gonna probably read there, and you can get the same content out of it. So, I like this paper. But yeah, any other comments from the chat? Please let me know. Otherwise, we'll move on to something else. That was a nice paper. Ugh. Hey, Valpo. It was fun, yeah, and like it'd definitely be better if you've ever had to read any philosophy of language. This is probably more interesting than any of those papers, and you get the same content in terms of you can discuss about like semantic meaning.